Lieutenant Sarah Chun stumbled backward, her rain-soaked civilian jacket concealing something nobody in that hallway could have guessed. The SEAL trident that marked her as one of the deadliest operators the Navy had ever produced. Just 28 years old, female, and carrying a service record with more confirmed engagements than anyone standing in front of her. They saw someone who wandered into the wrong building. She was about to show them exactly how wrong they were about everything. Sarah stood there, water from the storm outside still dripping from her jacket, while rain hammered the windows behind her. 28, compact build, maybe 5'6". On a good day, with dark hair pulled back tight and eyes that never seemed to need blinking. She'd worn regular clothes because the transfer papers hadn't mentioned anything about uniforms. "You're lost," he informed her flatly. "Administration building is over there." He pointed across the street like she was a child who'd wandered away from her parents. Sarah kept quiet. Her military identification sat in her jacket pocket. So did the official transfer order assigning her as the new advanced tactics instructor for the SEAL training pipeline. She'd survived 2 years at DevGru after graduating from Bud S, in a class that lost 11 people before Hell Week even kicked off. But standing in this hallway, none of that experience showed on her face. Before we go further, drop your location in the comment section below. Her dad, who was Navajo and worked the oil rigs, taught her to shoot before she hit double digits, not because it was fun, but because survival mattered. Long afternoons tracking mule deer through endless sand and scrub, learning how wind behaves, how to judge distance without technology, how to make your breathing disappear. By her 14th birthday, she could punch holes through aluminum cans at 400 yards, using nothing but iron sights. Her mother taught physics at the local high school, and gave Sarah the other half of what she'd need. Discipline that turned chaos into mathematics. Precision that made impossible things routine. Focus that could cut through any distraction. At 18, Sarah joined the Navy. Not to prove anything to anyone, just because it seemed like the hardest possible thing she could attempt. Bud S came next. Half a year of freezing ocean water, endless sand, and instructors who didn't care about anything except whether you'd quit. She didn't. From there came SEAL Team 3, then Selection 4, the unit most people still called SEAL Team 6, even though that name had yet been official in decades. She never talked about any of it. No patches on her gear, no photos posted anywhere, no war stories at parties. The work was classified, and the only people who needed to know her capabilities already knew them. That was the core problem right there. Outside that tiny circle of people who'd worked alongside her, nobody believed a woman could have done what she'd done. The senior chief crossed his arms over that ribbon-covered chest. "Listen, I don't know who sent you here, but this briefing is instructors only." Sarah reached into a jacket without saying anything and pulled out her ID holder. She held it up, where all three of them could see it clearly. The senior chief squinted at it like he was trying to read fine print. His expression shifted from contempt to confusion. He took the ID from her hand, studied it carefully, then passed it to the guy beside him, a lieutenant commander with a sultan pepper beard that looked like it had seen too many oceans. The lieutenant commander read it. "Correct," Sarah replied. "Advanced tactics. For qualification training?" He shook his head slowly. "The candidates who make it this far are already some of the toughest operators the Navy produces. They don't need someone coming in from ... He glanced at the ID again. DevGru. That's a support role, isn't it? Administration work. Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed completely level. I was a breacher and designated marksman. Multiple rotational assignments in Yemen and Syria. My qualification file has everything documented. The lieutenant commander handed back her ID. Our students respond to instructors who've actually been in the teams, people who've deployed downrange and done the real work. You understand what I'm telling you? She understood perfectly. They were informing her she didn't belong in that building, not because her experience was lacking. Her operational record exceeded most of the instructors working there, but because she didn't fit their mental picture. Female, young, quiet. The assumptions were pre-installed in their thinking. The transfer orders had gotten delayed somewhere in the routing process. Why don't you head over to the admin office? Sarah slid her ID back into her pocket and looked him straight in the eyes. I'll be in the briefing room. You can explain to Captain Hendricks why his new instructor wasn't allowed to attend. She walked past all three of them into the briefing room and took a seat in the back row. Her hands were steady on the outside, but her chest felt like someone had strapped a weight vest around it. She'd expected resistance. She always did, but it never stopped feeling like getting punched in the stomach by someone you were supposed to trust. She thought about her father setting up targets at distances that seemed impossible and telling her the rifle doesn't care who's behind the trigger. She thought about Hell Week, that endless night when they dragged boats through surf while half the class quit because their bodies simply gave out. She'd finished. She thought about the firefight outside Rucker, the one where a spotter took shrapnel to the neck and Sheedy had to drag him behind cover. Apply the tourniquet, using her TCC training. Get him breathing again, then re-engage the enemy that had pinned down their entire element. None of that mattered in this room, not yet anyway. The briefing room filled slowly. 30 men in khaki uniforms, a few in camouflage, every single one of them a seasoned instructor with years of teaching experience. They glanced at her when they entered, then looked away. Nobody sat anywhere near her. Nobody introduced themselves. She was invisible, like a clerical mistake that had somehow taken human form. The senior chief entered last and positioned himself at the front beside a projection screen. He didn't acknowledge her existence. He launched straight into the briefing. Updates to the training pipeline. New standards for maritime operations. A demographic breakdown of the incoming class. Sarah took notes on everything. She already knew most of it, but she wrote it all down anyway. 2 weeks into the training cycle, the tension escalated. Sarah had been assigned to co-instruct the tactics block with the Master Chief, a guy named Collier who made it abundantly clear he considered her a liability waiting to happen. The students, 22 exhausted candidates in the final phase of their qualification training, watched her with the same skepticism their instructors projected. Collier ran the first drill. Urban movement, clearing a shoot house with live ammunition and role players acting as threats. The students moved through it mechanically, efficient, but completely predictable. When they finished, Collier nodded his approval. Solid work. That's exactly how it's done. Sarah raised a hand. Can I show them a different approach? Collier frowned. Different approach. She stood and walked to the whiteboard, sketching the building layout entirely from memory. You stacked on the door and went straight through. That works perfectly if you have surprise. But if the enemy knows you're coming, you're walking straight into a fatal funnel. There's a side window here. She tapped the diagram with the marker. 2-man entry through glass. Suppressed shots to neutralize the first room, then collapse the stack from an unexpected angle. One of the students, a broad-shouldered guy with a thick Texas accent, shook his head. That sounds like a really good way to get yourself shot. Sarah looked directly at him. It's a really good way to stay alive when the front door is a kill zone. This is how we operated in Mosul after conventional entries got our partners killed. The room went completely silent. Collier stepped forward, his face darkening. Lieutenant, we teach fundamentals here. Proven tactics that work, not experimental theories. It's not experimental, Sarah said evenly. It's operational doctrine that saved lives when standard approaches failed. The room stayed quiet. Collier's expression hardened. We'll stick with the established lesson plan. That night, students gathered outside the barracks. Their voices were low but perfectly audible through the window where Sarah sat reviewing the next day's training schedule. She heard one of them say it clearly. They seriously sent us a girl to teach tactics. The breaking point came during a live fire exercise 3 days later. The scenario: hostage rescue in a 2-story structure with multiple rooms and armed role players using simunition rounds that hurt like hell but would unkill anyone. Kalia briefed the students, laid out the entire plan, then turned to Sarah. You want to observe from the control room, or are you actually going to demonstrate something? She stood up. I'll run it. The students exchanged glances. Collier smirked. All right, then. You get 2 teammates. Pick them. Sarah chose the 2 smallest students in the entire class, both of them skeptical but willing to see what would happen. She checked their weapons, training M4S configured for simunition with suppressors removed per range safety protocols, then gave them a 60-second brief. We're not using the front entrance. We're taking the west window, clearing the first floor, then collapsing upstairs from the flank stay me. Don't fire unless I give you the signal. The range safety NCO gave the green light. Medical personnel stood by. They entered through the window in near total silence. Sarah moving with the kind of economy that comes from hundreds of real-world breaches where mistakes end careers or lives. She put 2 controlled shots into the first role player before he even registered her presence, then transitioned smoothly to the second target. Center mass hits that dropped him in the doorway. Her teammates followed precisely, weapons up, spacing tight and professional. She led them upstairs, reading every angle, clearing each room with precision that looked effortless but required absolute mastery of timing and geometry. The final room held the hostage and 2 armed role players. Sarah took the first shot at 12 feet, a precision round that in actual combat would have been immediately fatal. The second role player turned toward her and she put him down with a controlled pair before his weapon even started rising. Total elapsed time: 48 seconds. When she exited the building, the students stood in stunned silence. Collier checked the monitors showing every angle of the exercise. Every shot had been clean. No wasted movement, no missed angles. Perfect execution. The next morning, Captain Hendricks, the officer in charge of the qualification training detachment, called Sarah into his office. He was lean, probably in his 50s, a former SEAL team commander with a reputation for being brutally fair. He gestured toward a chair without ceremony. Sit down, Lieutenant. She sat. I reviewed the footage from yesterday's exercise, he said without preamble. That was exceptional work. I also reviewed the reports from your co-instructors. There's been considerable friction. Sarah said nothing, waiting. Hendricks leaned back in his chair. I'm assigning you as lead instructor for advanced tactics, effective immediately. Collier will support you, not the other way around. These students need to see what right looks like, and you've proven you can show them. The change was immediate and obvious. The students stopped whispering in corners. They started asking real questions. Collier, to his credit, adjusted his attitude. He still didn't particularly enjoy being subordinate to someone half his age, but he respected genuine competence, and Sarah had that in overwhelming surplus. By the end of the training cycle, 3 students specifically credited her methods for helping them pass the final evaluation. She just did the work, the exact same way she always had. When the next class arrived, weeks later, the senior chief, who'd blocked the door on her first day, met her in the same hallway. Sarah nodded back and kept walking. Now let's talk about a completely different kind of authority, and what happens when someone mistakes position for actual power. The officers' club at Ramstein Air Base was a carefully constructed sanctuary. Every detail screamed success. Polished mahogany surfaces, aged leather that probably cost more than most cars, and the quiet, confident hum of people who held serious power. The air itself felt different inside those walls, filtered and scented with expensive scotch, and the faint, metallic temps of military decorations. Portraits of stern four-star generals from previous decades stared down from the walls, their painted eyes serving as silent judges of everyone who entered. Tonight the club was alive, celebrating a successful NATO logistics exercise. Laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings, light and brittle, as junior officers orbited around the gravitational center of the room. Brigadier General Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a man constructed entirely from ambition. Sharp jaw, sharper gaze, uniform so perfectly pressed it could probably cut glass. He was a master of supply chains, a prodigy of procurement, someone who could move mountains of equipment across continents with a few keystrokes and phone calls. But the terrain of actual combat was completely foreign to him. The dirt of real war had never touched the soles of his immaculate boots. His authority came not from shared hardship in the field, but from relentlessly enforcing regulations. He viewed the world as one massive checklist, and his primary mission was finding and publicly correcting anyone who left a box unchecked. His gaze, sweeping the room with an almost predatory sense of ownership, snagged on something that disrupted his perfect symphony. In a corner, almost invisible in the long shadows cast by towering bookshelves of military history, an old man was cleaning, probably pushing 70. Wearing a gray janitorial uniform that seemed to absorb all the roomie's expensive light and radiate nothing but quiet humility. This was Arthur Jenkins. His movements were slow and deliberate, marked by a slight limp that favored his left leg. He polished the brass nameplate on a display case containing a Vietnam-era flight helmet with a kind of reverence that seemed completely out of place for someone in his position. He was a ghost at the feast, a necessary but invisible worker, whose very presence was, to Thorne, an insult. Leaning toward a cluster of eager captains, Thorne lowered his voice to a conspiratorial level. "Gentlemen, observe a teachable moment," he began, a cruel smile touching his lips. "The chain of command isn't just a diagram on a wall. It represents value itself. At the top, decision-makers who shape policy. At the bottom, ... He gestured with his chin toward the old janitor. Notice the complete lack of military bearing, the casual disregard for the standards of this institution. Such things, if left unaddressed, corrode the entire structure of discipline." The captains nodded enthusiastically, their eyes reflecting their general's casual contempt like mirrors. Emboldened by his captive audience, Thorne set his scotch down with a decisive click and strode across the Persian rug. His polished shoes made no sound on the thick pile. The ambient conversation in the room seemed to track his movement, discussions faltering as dozens of pairs of eyes locked onto him. Everyone sensed a spectacle was about to unfold. Thorne stopped directly behind Arthur, who was carefully wiping down the glass of the display case, his reflection a stooped, blurry figure against the preserved history within. "Attendant." Thorne's voice cracked like a whip in the suddenly hushed room. "This is a restricted function for commissioned officers and their invited guests. Your duties should have concluded before 1800 hours. Explain your presence here." Arthur finished a long, smooth wipe before straightening up, a slow and obviously painful process that made his back emit faint popping sounds. He turned, his face a complex map of wrinkles carved by decades of time and hardship. His eyes, pale washed-out blue, held profound weariness but met the general's gaze without flinching. "My apologies, Janella," he said, his voice rough with age. "The event supervisor asked me to stay on standby in case of spills. Just trying to keep everything looking proper for you gentlemen." Thorne let out a short, sharp huff of dismissive air. "Looking proper. Your mere presence here detracts from the atmosphere. This club is a monument to warriors, pilots who face down enemy aircraft over Hanoi, strategists who outmaneuvered the Soviets during the Cold War. It's sacred space, not a utility closet for you to occupy." He ran a critical eye over Arthur's worn uniform, the faint stains of bleach and cleaning chemicals on the knees. "Frankly, it's embarrassing." The insult, so personal and so devastatingly public, hung in the air like toxic gas. The room had fallen into deep, uncomfortable silence. This wasn't a simple correction anymore. This was public humiliation. Arthur's weathered face remained completely neutral, a mask of practiced composure. I understand, sir. I'll collect my equipment and leave you to your event. Buthorn hadn't finished extracting every drop of satisfaction from his pathetic little power play. He took another step closer, lowering his voice to a tone of fake curiosity that was somehow more insulting than his previous outburst. Tell me, old man, since you seem so comfortable in this Hall of Heroes, did you ever contribute your part? Did you ever wear the uniform? Or has your entire contribution to this nation been waged with cleaning supplies? He looked back at his captains with a self-satisfied expression that made several people in the room feel physically sick. The weight of every stare in the club pressed down on Arthur like atmospheric pressure. He looked at the floor for a long moment, studying the intricate patterns of the rug beneath his worn work boots. Then his pale blue eyes lifted to meet Thorne's again. There was a flicker of something ancient in them now, a spark of fire that had been banked for decades. Yes, General, he said quietly, but his voice carried unmistakable weight. I served. Thorne's smirk widened into something genuinely cruel. Oh, you served. Wonderful. Please, do tell us all. I'm absolutely fascinated. As Arthur bent down to place a bottle of cleaning solution back into his cart, the cuff of his jumpsuit rode up his forearm, revealing skin that hadn't seen direct sunlight in probably 50 years. There, faded to a blurry greenish gray, was a tattoo of a coiled snake, ready to strike. This was the final piece he needed for his performance. And what exactly is that? He asked, pointing an accusatory finger. A memento of your fierce battles with clogged drains, a symbol of your daring supply runs to the base exchange. Every soldier, no matter how far from actual combat, loves giving himself some fearsome nickname, a call sign. I absolutely must know. What was the terrifying call sign they gave the man who cleaned the latrines? Captain Commander Comet. The young officers around him tittered obediently, their laughter forced and uncomfortable. He had reduced the old man to a cartoon character for his own entertainment and the amusement of his subordinates. Speak up, he commanded, his voice harder now. I want everyone here to hear it. What was your call sign? Arthur straightened up one final time. The stooped shoulders seemed to square themselves. The weariness in his eyes vanished, burned away by that strange, hot spark from somewhere deep within. The ambient hum of the club's ventilation system seemed to fall completely silent. For Thorna and most of the younger officers, it meant absolutely nothing. Kowalski's face had drained of all blood, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. He wasn't looking at a janitor anymore. He was staring at a myth made flesh. The other senior NCOs in the room had identical reactions. A master gunnery sergeant from the Marine Embassy Guard contingent took an involuntary step backward, his hand reflexively moving to where a sidearm would normally be holstered. His face looked carved from granite, and his eyes, famous throughout the military for their ability to see through steel and deception, were blazing with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. He was supposed to be testifying before Congress in Washington. Nobody expected him here. Ignoring the stunned salutes and gaping mouths of everyone in the room, General Wallace strode forward with the unstoppable momentum of an armored division. His eyes scanned the bizarre scene. Shattered glass on marble, terrified senior NCOs, a pompous brigadier general, and a quiet old janitor in a gray uniform. Wallace's gaze flew past Thorne's single star like it was a piece of lint on a uniform. Thorne, his face now ashen, his mind reeling, could only manage a pathetic stammer. "Sir, he's the custodial engineer assigned to Wallace's eyes closed for a brief second, as if experiencing immense physical pain. Let me be the absolute last person who ever has to educate you on this subject. Brigadier General, you are not fit to polish the boots this man forgot he even owned." Wallace took a deliberate step toward Thorne, who actually flinched, as if expecting to be struck. "The janitor you have spent the last 10 minutes publicly humiliating is the man the entire clandestine services community of the United States and NATO knew by one designation and one designation only. Viper 1. Wallace took another step forward. This man led Mac Vizog's Spike Recon team, Viper, across the fence into Laos and Cambodia for 3 consecutive years during the height of the Vietnam War. His team was so devastatingly effective at disruption and targeted elimination that the North Vietnamese army placed a bounty on his head worth more than a brand new fighter aircraft. He was captured once. Taken to a prisoner camp that officially didn't exist. A place so brutal it was known only as the Kennel. He escaped 2 weeks later, carrying 2 of his wounded teammates on his back for 80 miles through dense jungle while evading enemy patrols. Wallace's voice grew harder, each word a hammer blow. After Vietnam ended, the Central Intelligence Agency recruited him for their Special Activities Division. That tattoo you mocked so casually. It's the last thing a dozen Stasi colonels and KGB assassins ever saw before they died. He is the man who walked into the East German safe house of the Volkov network, a facility the MI6 declared absolutely impenetrable, and single-handedly dismantled their entire European operation in one night. Operation Serpent's Kiss. Look it up. Oh wait, you can't. It est classified at a level so far above your clearance that you read not permitted to even know it exists. He pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. And Ljubljana prison. You've heard of it, I'm certain. He is the only Western operative in recorded history to be held in its deepest level and walk out on his own feet. He spent 6 months in absolute darkness, and when he escaped, he brought with him the complete order of battle for the Soviet Union's Western group of forces. The intelligence he delivered single-handedly prevented a surprise invasion of Western Europe and potentially averted World War III. The 4-star general now stood nose to nose with the brigadier general, his voice dropping to its most lethal whisper. And EU. A glorified quartermaster whose greatest operational hardship was a delayed shipment of office furniture who dared stand in this room. On floors he now humbly cleans and question his service. You are a walking, breathing insult to the uniform you wear. Wallace's voice became absolutely arctic. Be in my office at 600 hours tomorrow morning. Bring your full dress uniform, a letter of resignation, and whatever microscopic fragments of honor you might still possess. Your career in the United States Air Force is finished. Now remove yourself from my sight before I do something we would both regret. Utterly and completely destroyed, Thorne turned and stumbled toward the exit, his public execution complete and witnessed by everyone who mattered. Wallace watched him leave, then addressed the silent, shell-shocked room in a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. Let this be a permanent lesson for every person here. The true heroes of this nation are not always the ones with stars on their shoulders or ribbons on their chests. They are the quiet professionals, the ghosts. Men like Arthur Genkins, who sacrificed everything in the darkness so that you could stand here safely in the light. He turned back to Arthur, his expression softening with deep, profound respect that bordered on reverence. Arthur, he said gently, using his first name with deliberate familiarity. It's finished. Your nation has not forgotten you. The director sends his personal and deepest apologies. There was a clerical error regarding your service benefits and pension that's been ongoing for 3 decades. It's been corrected. It's time to come home. As General Wallace gently guided Arthur Jenkins toward the door, a ripple of movement went through the entire room. The command sergeant major was first, snapping to the most rigid, heartfelt position of attention of his entire career. The rest of the senior NCOs followed instantly, like a wave. Then the officers, one by one, their faces displaying a mixture of shame and awe, all snapped to perfect attention, their hands rising in a salute that was not for a janitor in a gray uniform, but for a titan who'd shaped history from the shadows. Subscribe to hear more incredible stories of the quiet professionals who served in the shadows and were forgotten by the history they secretly wrote with their blood and sacrifice.